The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
We appreciate each and every one of you.
We really do, and we love what we do, so having such an amazing group of loyal listeners is both humbling and exciting for us.
Yes, and our recent rise in new listeners is pretty exciting too. So if you're new to us, welcome.
Yes, welcome all you new listeners. Well, no housekeeping tonight, Beth, so I guess let's get into your story tonight. All right, all you wanderers, sit back, get comfy, and let's get into it.
There is a place in Ireland that has been shrouded in mystery for hundreds of years. Just looking at it, perched on top of Montpelier Hill in the Dublin Wicklow mountain range, and it's not hard to understand why. With its ancient-looking stone facade and horrific stories of phantom screams heard in the night, it's the perfect spot for some ghost stories. They say a woman was put inside a barrel that was set on fire and rolled down the hill. They say men met with the devil inside its walls. They say a giant black cat prowls the countryside, conjured by Satan-worshipping men. What men would do this? The Hellfire Club. And just like the stone building on Montpelier Hill, the Hellfire Club is just as shrouded in outlandish rumor, legend, and mystery. 5,000 years ago, there was a Neolithic burial mound on Montpelier Hill. In 2016, archaeologists proved that it once existed when they excavated flint tools, a polished stone axe head, a bone pin, and megalithic art. But in 1725, the Speaker of the Irish House of Commons, William Connolly, demolished the stone cairns of the mound and used them to construct a hunting lodge. Connolly was incredibly wealthy, and his hunting lodge was strategically placed with all of its windows facing north so he could overlook his entire estate. The lodge was 2 stories tall. On the ground floor was a large kitchen, servants' quarters, and several small rooms. The second floor included 2 large rooms and a banquet hall. Although Connolly named the place Montpelier, over the years the hunting lodge has been named all kinds of things, from the haunted house to Connolly's Folly to the Hellfire Club. You see, Connolly purchased his estate from Philip, the first Duke of Wharton in England. Philip Wharton created the first Hellfire Club in 1719. The club was designed to attract men who wanted to test the morals of society, and Wharton was known for excessive drinking and outrageously lewd behavior. In 1721, King George ordered that the club be disbanded. Soon after Connolly constructed his hunting lodge on Montpelier Hill, the roof blew off. Concerned locals said it was caused by the vengeful spirits from the tomb that Connolly had desecrated. He didn't get to enjoy his lodge for very long because he died just 4 years after it was built. Now, the Irish Hellfire Club was founded in the late 1730s by Richard Parsons, 1st Earl of Ross, and James Worsdale, a portrait painter and actor. They followed the same ideals as the English version. They were wealthy men who challenged society by taking part in perceived immoral acts. Ross was known for being obscene, blasphemous, and for receiving his guests in the nude.
Oh, no.
The club also included Henry, 4th Baron Barry of Santry, who was tried for murder and convicted in 1739, Simon Luttrell, Colonel Henry Ponsonby, Colonel Richard St. George, and Colonel Clements. Together, they scandalized society with their gambling, intoxication, and debauchery.
Oh my God, I would love to hang out with these people.
Just so you could receive your guests in the nude, they'd only be your guests once.
That's not right. What are you trying to say?
In a letter from 1738, they claimed that part of the club's practices was the, quote, sacrifice of maidens. However, historians are pretty sure the wild stories of them actually sacrificing people is untrue. They think it was meant in the more figurative sense, like talking about their virginity, sacrificing maidens in that way. However, that doesn't mean that they were not violent towards women. And of course, there is one recorded account of an actual murder by a Hellfire Club member. The letter goes on to say that new members to the club had to make the following pledge. Pluto, I am thine. I, by the efficacious mighty self, do swear all that is called good by priest-rid fools entirely to abandon, and to let nothing share the least part of my favor but what is solely urged by most vicious and libidinous desires.
Wow.
You still want to be part of their club?
Kinda.
They were hedonistic and amused themselves by shocking society. Their favorite drink was a mixture of whiskey and hot butter called scalthine.
Yeah, no, I don't drink whiskey. Rum all the way or moonshine.
They met in the Eagle Tavern on Cork Hill near Dublin Castle, and accounts claim they always left the seat at the head of the table vacant in case the devil stopped by. Their mascot was a black cat. The Eagle was a pretty popular spot for all kinds of meetings, and the Hellfire Club was happy to accept the hunting lodge on Montpelier Hill when William Connolly bequeathed it to them in his will. So, just to be clear, William Connolly purchased the land from a known Hellfire Club member, and then he left it to known members of the Hellfire Club. The Hellfire Club had such a well-known reputation that writer Jonathan Swift said they were a, quote, brace of monsters, blasphemers, and bacchanalians. Now this is coming from a man who wrote an entire satire about Ireland solving their money problems if they could just eat their own babies.
No way, really?
Yes. So, for Jonathan Swift to say that the Hellfire Club was bad, I think they were pretty shocking.
Yeah, that's like the pot killing the kettle black.
Exactly. There doesn't seem to have been any real hierarchy within the group, although they did have ceremonial roles. For example, James Warsdale was the, quote, master of revels. So, although the Hellfire Club did technically rent Connolly's old hunting lodge, there really isn't any concrete evidence that the group ever met there, although there is one recorded anecdote that implies that they did. It states, a whole Hellfire Club was actually put to flight and chased out of the house by a goose dropped down a chimney that was on fire, within at most 20 miles of Dublin. So from that one account, they think that that's proof that they met on Montpelier Hill.
Correct.
Correct. By the end of the 1740s, the stories about the Hellfire Club had taken on the proportions of myth and legend, to the point that they were still being embellished and retold well into the 1930s. One of the most well-known legends is that during a card game that ran long into the night, a stranger arrived and asked to be dealt into the game. The Hellfire Club members were deep into their cups of scalefiend and graciously agreed to let the stranger join them, especially since the weather outside was dark and stormy. At some point, one of the men accidentally dropped a card onto the floor, and as he bent over to retrieve it, he could see everyone's feet. The stranger had hairy legs like a goat and cloven hooves. When the man sat back up, the stranger erupted into a ball of flame and disappeared. Now, the interesting part about that story is that it's incredibly similar to the legend of Loftus Hall. The family that owned Loftus Hall also had a hunting lodge on Montpelier Hill. A second popular legend about the Hellfire Club on Montpelier Hill says that a curious young farmer went out to the lodge one night because he wanted to see what was going on for himself. When he knocked on the door, he was invited in right away and was allowed to witness all the activities that night. The following morning, the farmer was found wandering the countryside, unable to speak. He was mute for the rest of his life and at times would tremble uncontrollably. A third legend involves a stranger who came to town and was put up for the night at a local farm. After hearing about the Hellfire Club, this brave stranger decided to check things out for himself as well. A while later, he was found dead. The farmer and the local priest decided to go up to the Hellfire Club and confront the devil worshippers once and for all. When they arrived, they found the lodge empty, except there was a banquet laid out on the table, and the room was being prowled by a massive black cat with what looked like horn-shaped ears. The farmer went back outside as the priest removed his holy water. As the priest performed an exorcism, the cat exploded into pieces. When the relieved priest came back outside, he found the farmer dead on the ground, his face covered in deep scratches. So, like I said, the legends surrounding the Hellfire Club were retold and greatly embellished well into the 1930s. Rumors spread that the president of the Hellfire Club went by the title the King of Hell and dressed in horns, wings, and hooves during their meetings. They held black masses and sacrificed both animals and people. They set the lodge on fire in order to make it more hellish looking. In fact, the lodge did catch on fire, but even the cause of that is shrouded in mystery. One rumor is what I already said. The members of the Hellfire Club set it on fire on purpose to create a more hell-like ambiance. Another rumor is that two of the members got in a fight, and one of the men was doused in brandy and set on fire, accidentally causing the structure to burn too. But a more likely theory is that William Connolly's son set it on fire because he wanted the Hellfire Club to move out. After the fire, they did move out, but to another hunting lodge built by William Connolly's family called the Steward's House. The Steward's House is known to be haunted. One of the alleged specters is a very large black cat. Of course, people believe it's the same black cat from the earlier stories, although there are versions where the cat was doused in whiskey and set on fire before it ran to the steward's house, where it has been ever since. Between 1968 and 1970, when the steward's house was being converted into an art center, there were several documented encounters with this ghost cat. One involved a family friend and two workmen who were confronted by a black cat with glowing red eyes. There have also been reports of two female entities dressed like nuns who are believed to have taken part in some Hellfire Club dark masses. But let's backtrack a little bit and return to that hunting lodge on top of Montpelier Hill. In 1749, the lodge was purchased by Charles Cobb, who was the son of the Archbishop of Dublin. Cobb allegedly died in the building in 1751. But then in 1771, the Hellfire Club began holding meetings in the lodge on Montpelier Hill once again for 30 years. And the rumors swirled just like they did before. The most well-known member this time around was another member of the Irish House of Commons named Thomas Whaley. He also went by the names Buck Whaley and Jerusalem Whaley, and he was known to be quite the gambler. One story from this time period is that the Holy Fathers, which was what they were calling themselves now, kidnapped, murdered, and ate a farmer's daughter. When Whaley died in 1800, the Hellfire Club disbanded for good. Today, the hunting lodge on Montpelier Hill is privately owned as far as I can tell. It used to be a popular destination for day hiking. There was a parking area and a well-maintained 2.8-mile loop. And I may be wrong, but it looks like the section that leads to the Hellfire Club is no longer accessible to the public. Although the exterior looks intriguing, with its 18th century stonework, the interior is moss-covered and, unfortunately, has some graffiti, which may be why they've shut it down to hikers. But it definitely looks as mysterious as it sounds.
I love the Hellfire Club, and it does sound totally outlandish to me. And I think they were just a bunch of guys getting together, doing guy things. And, the people on the outside were wondering what was going on in there. And, of course, they made up all these outlandish stories.
And their whole purpose was to shock society, right? So if they were hearing what people were saying about them, they probably got a kick out of that. And then they may have even planted some seeds themselves.
Right.
Made some kind of offhand, outlandish comment that they knew could be construed a certain way, and they may have created the myths and legends about themselves.
Yeah, it's kind of like when the people down the street are nosy and they're watching everything you do. You kind of give them a show. And that's kind of probably what happened here, Let's give them something to talk about.
Exactly. Hey, did you know? In the 1600s, Londoners were encouraged to keep fart jars. Yes, corked jars containing one's own fart odors. They did this because people believed that if they uncorked the jar and let out the fart stench, it would purify any already existing bad air. I don't exactly know how people captured these odors into a jar, but I can picture them trying. And now, unfortunately, so can you. Who'da thunk it?
Dear, just to touch on your who'da thunk it.
Yes.
Well, we all did that when we were kids.
You didn't just bend over and try to light them on fire? You captured them in jars?
It's not something I would do, although I've seen people try to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, capturing farts in jars, that was a thing back in the, 70s, 80s.
But then when you'd open the
when we
jar,
were little kids.
Could you smell it when you opened the jar?
Yeah.
Really?
I've cleared tents. Of course you could smell it coming out of a jar. But I digress.
Wow, the things we learn when we're stuck in this little booth staring at each other.
Yeah. Well, this this could be a fart jar.
It could. It really seriously could. So, why don't you tell us about where your mind wandered this week?
We're traveling to England for my story.
Nice.
When you pass by the ancient Ram Inn, nestled into its little hollow in Wanton-under-Edge, Gloucestershire, England, just based on the timber lattice work on the front of the once bustling pub, you can tell that the building has been there for a very, very long time. Its whitewashed exterior pretty much screams medieval. As you step inside the ancient Ram Inn, you are instantly transported back in time 878 years. All you have to do is sit down in one of the many upholstered chairs and look around at the massive timber beams overhead and the stone walls that surround you. It's easy to imagine the once bustling pub filled with weary medieval travelers and smoke from the fireplaces. You can almost hear the ale being poured and the thunk of pewter tankards being placed on the wooden tables. But the ancient Ram Inn wasn't always an inn. The building has had a pretty interesting existence. I mean, you pretty much would expect it to, since it's been there for almost 900 years. But first, let's go back as far as we can. There is evidence of an Iron-Aged fort in Wanton-under-Edge, and the area was occupied by the ancient Romans for 350 years. The town of Wanton-under-Edge has existed since 940 AD. It was destroyed by fire sometime between 1199 and 1216, and yes, the ancient Ram Inn did exist then, and it burned down also. But the town was rebuilt in 1252. In 1470, the Battle of Nibley Green took place, about a mile from the ancient Ram Inn. It was the last battle in England between warring feudal lords. In 1588, beacons were set up on the hills overlooking Wanton-under-Edge to warn England of the incoming Spanish Armada. The ancient Ram Inn was built in 1145 on land that was rumored to have a pagan burial ground. It also just happens to sit on a ley line that extends directly to Stonehenge. Now, for those of you who may not know about ley lines, they were proposed in 1925 by self-taught archaeologist Alfred Watkins. His theory is that during prehistoric times, man used certain areas as navigational beacons. He based this on actual archaeological evidence, by the way. And along these lines, for thousands of years, men built monuments and placed burial mounds. There is an abundance of Neolithic structures that sit on these ley lines. It's a pretty fascinating theory. But it is just a theory, and in some circles, it's a pretty controversial one. So regardless of whether or not you put any stock into ley lines, the ancient Ram Inn sits smack dab on one, and it connects to Stonehenge. Now in 1145, the building wasn't meant to be an inn. It was actually housing for enslaved individuals and masons who were constructing the nearby St. Mary's Church. But as the building was being constructed, natural streams had to be rerouted, which some people think was a very bad idea. They proposed that these streams were being used by pagan worshippers, and that diverting them may have created some bad energy. And according to one of the original deeds for the building from 1350, it was actually connected to St. Mary's Church by a tunnel system. This makes a lot of sense, because after the church was completed, the next resident at the ancient Ram Inn was a priest. At some point, those tunnels were bricked up, and to this day, no one has been able to find where they started. But if you believe that cosmic or paranormal energies travel by water or ley lines, then think about that for a second. The ancient Ram Inn was built on a pagan burial ground. They had to reroute the water in order to do so, and it also sits on a ley line. And there were tunnels that connected it to a church.
So lots of pathways.
That there is. In the 1500s, the building was without a doubt used by wool merchants, which happened to be the major industry in Wanton-under-Edge at the time. There has been evidence found in the building to suggest it, including tenterhooks that were used by wool merchants from that time. Eventually, it became an inn and a public house. The deed from 1820 lists the building as the Ram. So, from sometime in the 1600s all the way up to 1930, the ancient Ram Inn was an inn. Between 1930 and 1968, the Ram Inn was a private residence, and it changed ownership numerous times. But then in 1968, John Humphreys and his family moved in. And that's when the ancient Ram Inn became known as one of the most haunted places in all of England. John Humphreys unfortunately passed away in 2017. But for the entire 50 years he lived there in the inn, he claimed to have paranormal experiences, beginning the very first night. He claimed that an unseen force grabbed him by the arm and dragged him from his bed and across the room. He said something else unseen banged on his window. Several of these sources I checked said that his wife and daughter were so upset by the paranormal activity occurring in the house that they chose not to live there. But Mr. Humphreys did not want to leave, and he continued to live there alone. Another claim was that he would hear children crying in the house when there were no children there. During renovation of the basement, Mr. Humphreys accidentally unearthed several skeletons next to the basement stairs. They were all reported to be those of children. They also apparently each had a broken dagger mixed in with their remains. He believed they were children who were sacrificed during pagan rituals and had been there since before the ancient Ram Inn was built. And unfortunately, the children aren't the only remains to have been found in the house. Recently, Mr. Humphrey's daughter, Caroline, and her partner, Mark, unearthed another partial burial. They found a jaw, spine, femur bones, and a skull. Like I said, Mr. Humphreys lived alone in the inn for 50 years. He withstood all kinds of paranormal activity. Today, his daughter Caroline lives there, and she successfully opened the ancient Ram Inn to archaeologists so they can gain a better understanding of the history of the area, and paranormal investigators were invited also. Because discovering the children's remains didn't put an end to the eerie sound of children crying in the house, to this day, one of the most common reports in the men's kitchen area is hearing the cry of a baby. White mist have shown up in photographs of the room, and something on the stairs leading from the kitchen to the first floor has been known to push people. The most haunted room in the inn is known as the Bishop's Room. Not only have multiple people had multiple different experiences there, but it seems to be frequented by multiple entities. Now remember, the inn was originally intended to house the workers who were once constructing St. Mary's Church, and then it became a priest's residence. So the Bishop's Room pays homage to that. But there has been rumors for a long time that dark magic was practiced inside the inn. Some of the entities seen in the room are quite harmless, but others seem to come straight from a horror movie. If these reports are true, then it's some of the scariest hauntings I've ever heard of. First, on the harmless end of the spectrum, is the apparition of a shepherd and a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. The dog is said to materialize in one end of the room, stride purposely across the floor, then disappear into the opposite wall. Also on the more harmless end, the apparition of a Roman centurion has been seen, except he's on horseback and he crosses the room on his horse before disappearing into the wall. Apparently, a plumber who was at the inn to do some work was so freaked out that he refused to come back.
It's a little freaky if you see the apparition of a centurion on a horse galloping through the room.
Yeah, and we've heard about that with workers in other supposedly haunted places where they just had enough and they drop their tools and they leave and they never come back to get them.
Mm-hmm.
But then we get into the not-so-harmless spirits. There are accounts of people hearing a man scream from inside the bishop's room. Rumor is he lost his life when someone pushed his head into the flames of the fireplace. Other overnight guests have reported seeing the shadows of 2 monks and at least 1 nun. But they described feeling dread and fear washing over them when they see them. A story that didn't happen in the bishop's room, but adds some more to the narrative, is that in the earlier years of John Humphreys living in the house, he brought home an antique painting of well-known theologian and evangelist pastor John Wesley. Wesley died in 1791, but he basically revived Methodism and the Methodist Church. Humphreys was really pleased with his find, and he thought the spirits in the house would appreciate the painting. They did not. Doors that had never been an issue before suddenly began opening and slamming on their own. The window knocking was back, but instead of just being centered on his bedroom window, it sounded as if it was happening on every window in the house. The family dog wouldn't go into the hallway where the portrait was hung. But let's get back to the bishop's room. Overnight guests have heard the sound of something heavy being dragged across the attic floor above their heads. The bed in the room has also reportedly shook by itself, and people have reported to have been woken up to this terrifying image: a young woman hanging straight down from the ceiling by her feet, so that her face is inches above the bed. Like I said before, it's horror movie stuff.
It reminds me of The Haunting of Hill House, the one that the more recent one, where it was like the broke neck girl.
Yes.
And like hanging over her.
Yeah, that was creepy as all hell.
Yeah, that sounds terrifying.
There are also long-standing rumors that both an incubus and a succubus inhabit the bishop's room, which I think relates to the rumors of dark magic. Now, I won't go into a lot of detail about what those are, but in a nutshell, they're demonic spirits that feed off the opposite sex through intimate means. Another room in the inn, called the Witch's Room, has its own entity, although I have to be honest, I had a difficult time reconciling the legend about the room with the accounts I found about the haunting. So, the legend is that during the 1500s, a young woman accused of witchcraft fled to the Ram Inn and tried to hide in one of the rooms. She was caught and was eventually burned at the stake. Now, the entity that is seen in the room is a young woman, but she's been seen standing in the window and she waves her hand as people pass by. To me, these two things just don't jive. So, I'm not sure about the validity of the accused witch story, but I couldn't find anything to back it up. I even looked for witchcraft trials in Wanton Under Edge, and I couldn't find anything. Now, there were witchcraft trials that were happening at that time, so again, it could be a valid story, but I just don't know.
So if I put my 2 cents in, if you don't mind, that doesn't make sense to me either. Like, if she was hiding out because she was accused of witchcraft, why would the entity in the room be standing in the window and waving at people?
It makes no sense.
It doesn't match up.
But you'll have that with stories.
Oh, of course. I mean, look at the Hellfire Club and all of the crazy rumors that swirled about that place.
Right. Altogether, John Humphreys believed that there were 20 different entities haunting the ancient Ram Inn. Now, here's what I think. I think all these experiences John Humphreys claimed he had really happened, and I think there's enough actual evidence that there was a burial ground under the building, and still is, since another skeleton was discovered once his daughter took over the property. But I also think, like the Hellfire Club, that rumors and legends about the ancient Ram Inn play a huge part in it also. And sometimes it can be difficult to separate the legends from what's really happened. I also think that Caroline opening the inn to just archaeologists and paranormal investigators will go a long way in helping to figure it out.
I think it's a good idea, too, because at least if archaeologists are in there, they can determine exactly all the different residents that have been in the Ram Inn and all the different ways that it was used. And then they can tie that directly to the paranormal encounters that are happening. And maybe they can weed out some of the rumors and put some actual names, maybe, or identities to some of the entities that are there.
Perhaps so.
So, 2 buildings tonight, steeped in both mystery and the paranormal. If you liked tonight's episode and you don't want to wait a whole week for a new one, you can always check out our premium bonus episodes. They're just $3 a piece, and you're not locked into anything.
Right. and they're a great way to support our show. Your $3 goes directly towards our production cost.
And lastly, before we sign off, if you'd like to meet us and immerse yourself in some Bigfoot culture at the same time, circle September 30th on your calendars.
That's right, Beth and I will be at the Whitehall, New York Sasquatch Festival, and we'd love to meet you all.
Yes, we would.
Well, I think that about wraps it up for this episode, all you fellow wanderers.
I think so.
Join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon.